Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. And friends, today I want to speak to you about a topic I'm sure you've never heard anyone speak about before. And the topic is how non-Jews, although not obligated to keep the Taryag Mitzvot, the 613 commandments in the Torah, still get punished for not doing so. And what I'm trying to say is the notion that although something may be permissible, it may not, or in this case, is not beneficial. And also the notion that the mitzvot are either speaking to everyone or they're not speaking to Jews. Because I'm sure that you've heard it before, that Jews are obligated to keep all the mitzvot in the Torah, and non-Jews are only obligated to keep the Sheva mitzvot, the 7 laws of Noah. Now this is fine and dandy, and we must note that the key word here is obligated. However, this notion, when repeated by rabbis, is usually rendered as Jews only have to keep the Torah and non-Jews should only keep the Sheva mitzvahs. And the key words here are should and only. Now, philosophically and even halachically, there is no problem with the notion of being obligated to, because no one is obligated to succeed or to be happy or even to choose life over death. Of course not, because if we didn't have the full ability to freely be allowed to fail or succeed, then free will would not exist. However, the notion that non-Jews should only aspire to keep the 7 laws and not even consider doing more and possibly the 613 mitzvahs or even becoming a Jew is a concept I want to try to explore a little deeper today. And friends, if this is so, then one would have to conclude that there cannot possibly be a positive consequential result in keeping God's commandments. Or if there is one, it only affects Jews and not non-Jews. Or how, like many today who go as far as to strip away the obvious consequential rewards of keeping the mitzvahs and they replace them with abstract divine favor instead of the literal consequential outcome of doing good or not doing good has in itself. In other words, the thinking that doing good is not actually what produces good in this world, but rather by acting out the role we happen to be born into, that actually wins earth repairing credits with the Almighty. Silly, huh? Friends, it's time to stop beating around the bush and begin speaking truthfully. And what's the truth? That this form of theology was only developed to keep non-Jews from Judaism, mainly by ethically disheartening the would-be convert by telling him that his desire for wanting to keep God's commands will not make his life or this world any better. So instead, he or she should not bother with the extra effort and just keep the 7 laws. However, I know that the big question is, how do we know what's true? How do you know if I'm not lying to you and other people are speaking the truth? Well, friends, one way we could validate the advice we receive is by comparing it with the Torah itself. Because I'm sure that you didn't leave one cult to enter another one and just go by what people tell you. Everything must be verified against Torah. Now, don't get me wrong, we believe in the oral law. However, we also know that our ethics don't derive from the oral law, but from the Torah Shebiktav, from the written law. However, I would also tell you that there is nothing in the oral law that even comes close to even begin to describe an obligation we have to discourage a non-Jew from wanting to become a Jew and keep Torah. In other words, any discouragement you may have heard of from the rabbis does not derive from Chazal, but from prejudice. But regardless, anyone who has studied the Torah, parsha by parsha, would have noticed pre-Sinai biblical characters, although not commanded to keep the mitzvot from Sinai, still paying the price for not keeping them. In other words, the idea that the reward or punishment for keeping or not keeping a certain mitzvah is bundled within the consequences themselves. In other words, if non-Jews should not keep Torah commandments, why do we see Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed when the prophets tell us that their sin was cruelty? I mean, where's that in the 7 laws, right? I mean, why do we see Ham cursed when, according to the literal text in the story, he didn't really violate any of the 7 laws? Or why do we see that after Yosef dishonoring his brothers and his father, why do we see him tossed into a pit, almost getting what he deserves? Because again, we know that non-Jews were only obligated to the 7 laws. Now you're probably thinking that your rabbi told you that non-Jews actually have more commandments. I believe that they bring the count up to 66. However, did you ever ask, where did they get that number from? Because the halacha is very clear that there are only 7 laws of Noah. Now, we know that Chazal later added on more commandments to the 7. That's fine. And we also have to honor that, right? I mean, lo sasur. However, we accept this only as a rabbinic legislative command and not technically the will of God for humanity. And we will never call this part of the 7 laws. And really, these extra commands only make up around 10% of the 66. The rest were only conjured up by modern day rabbis who figured if our patriarchs in the Torah and other Goyim in Tanakh suffered from it, it must have also been part of their commandments. There was really clearly no inspiration behind it, my friends. Even in our own lives, you don't have to be a genius to see that keeping the Sabbath and all the ethical precepts found in the Torah are conducive to a well-rounded, healthy, and happy family life. Ideas like modesty and sexual purity only help, my friends, and don't hurt. Ideas like honoring your parents and adhering to the Shemitah cycle, being kind to others, giving charity, heck, even believing in God. All these things are good things, even though they do not appear in the 7 laws. Now, if you're agreeing with me on this, you're probably thinking, why would anyone want to encourage anyone to do less? Now, in defense of the silly rabbinical establishment of today, I will try to explain why they do what they do. And it has to do with the notion of legislative jurisdiction versus consequential jurisdiction. It is true that according to the rule of Jewish law, if both a non-Jew and a Jew violate the Sabbath, the Jew would be liable and the non-Jew wouldn't be. Or if a Jew and a non-Jew ate chametz on Pesach, the Jew would be liable and the non-Jew wouldn't be. And no doubt that we could give hundreds of scenarios bringing down the same idea. So because of this, the Jewish legal mind would concur, why put yourself under this law when you don't have to be? And they actually teach that by reaching out to non-Jews, we would actually be committing the avera of lifnei iver, of placing a stumbling block before the blind. Now, that would be the case if we were dealing with a secular amoral law, but I'm sure no one will classify the Torah in that category. Or in this case, would it also be better for the Jews to have rejected the Torah on Mount Sinai? Because in the same sense, they would have avoided legislation, which is why we see that Jews do proselytize for born irreligious Jews, because they teach that if they're born from a Jewish mother, they are liable for breaking Torah law, which is a bit silly for anyone who knows Jewish law to say, because as the Chazon Ish taught, that every secular Jew today does not have the status of a regular Jew, but rather he is what we call a tinok shenishba, a child that was kidnapped and thus is not responsible for not knowing or doing Torah. So in other words, wouldn't it also be lifnei iver, placing a stumbling block to make him liable when he wasn't liable in the first place, just as they teach on why we don't encourage non-Jews to become Jewish? Think about it, my friends, because there's no way around it. Friends, Torah brings life, to the point that we see that the Almighty tells Israel that by choosing a life of Torah, they would be choosing life, basically stating that by living by their old Noahide restrictions, they'd be choosing death. Heck, even in the Gemara it states in Yevamos that non-Jews suffer for not converting to Judaism. So non-Jews should not only keep Torah, but should become Jewish themselves. And another reason that we are even having this discussion is because modern day rabbis have mangled halacha to such an extent that they have made conversion to Judaism take years instead of days, which is how the halacha instructs us. Mainly so that they can have more time to dissuade the potential convert. When common sense would tell you the more religious Jews, the better, because ultimately there's only one thing that separates a Jew from a non-Jew, and that's that commitment the Jew has made to live by every word in our God's Torah. And if you're interested in becoming a Jew, which I wholeheartedly encourage you to do, please visit Torah Judaism International, and the website is torahjudaism.org. And for more information on everything Jewish, please visit bejewish.org. Thank you.